The AE86. Nearly 40 years ago, the plucky little commuter car that could entered our hearts, and it never really left. And thankfully, today, the spirit of the AE86 is alive and well in the GT86 and the new GR86. All of them, rear-wheel drive, manual transmission, lightweight, plucky, fun little sports cars that are way more fun than their price tag says they should be. And the evolution from the boxy little commuter car that was the AE86 into the full-fledged budget sports car of the GR86 today is an interesting one. So I want to run you through the generations of one of Toyota's greatest cars ever made and stack up the new GR86 against the old AE86 to see if it still captures that spirit that made us fall in love with the Hachiroku. Now, if you ask anyone what their favorite car from the 80s was, they might answer a DeLorean or a Lamborghini Countach. But 80s kids like me know that the real answer is a Toyota Corolla. Whether you know it from a certain anime, or you grew up watching Keiichi Tsuchiya thrash Corollas in old bootleg best motoring videos like I did, the Hachiroku, which translates into the 86, is one of the most important cars to ever come out of Japan. But how did it start? Honestly, it's kind of hard to say. It's easy to point to the Corolla, which was introduced all the way back in 1966, and say that this is the birth of the 86. I mean, they share the same name after all. However, the end of the fourth generation of Toyota Corolla was in 1982, and that was the end of the mainstream rear-wheel drive Toyota Corolla. And after that, the Corolla name basically became a word you could say to put yourself to sleep. You see, in 1983, the Corolla name diverged into two entirely different cars. You had the everyday, everyman, front-wheel drive, budget commuter car, and the rear-wheel drive, compact sports car known as the AE85 and AE86 that actually shared very little in common with the base model Corolla. So if it's not the Corolla that created the Corolla GT-S, then maybe we can look at a couple other cars from Toyota's history that might be the genesis. First up is Toyota's first sports car. And no, we're not talking about the drop-dead beautiful 2000 GT, which I would literally probably sell my own mother for. No, we're talking about the humble S800. And the S obviously stands for sports. That's how you know it's a sports car. You see, the Toyota S800 had a tiny little flat engine and rear-wheel drive, and was purely focused on handling dynamics over horsepower. And on paper, it was all the ingredients of a super fun car, just like the AE86. Sadly, the Sports 800 ended when the Corolla was introduced, but there was another. Toyota then created the Toyota Celica. And honestly, the Toyota Celica's complicated history is a story for another day, but it's a good story. Either way, it was a smaller displacement, lightweight counterpart to the 2000 GT. But you see, as time went on, the Celica became fat and heavy, and the Corolla became front-wheel drive and boring, which left Toyota with a little gap in their product lineup. A gap they filled by taking a bunch of parts from both cars, putting them together, and creating the Hachiroku.
Over the curb, on two wheels, back down again.
AE86. Let's break it down. The A stands for the high-revving 4A engine that powers the AE86. The 4A GE can hit up to 7,500 RPMs. It is, of course, just as weird as any other 80s Toyota in that it had 5 valves per cylinder. And if you were at any racetrack in the 80s or the early 90s, or at any drift event in the late 90s or early 2000s, you would know a 4A GE high revving and bouncing off the red line apart from any other motor out there. It just makes such a unique sound. Now, next up in the name is E86. E86. That's the Corolla's model code internally over at Toyota. The generation of Corolla that the AE86 is derived from was the E80 generation. And finally is the 6, the Roku. And that stands for the 6th variation in the lineup. It starts with the base model with the anemic 1.3 liter motor, all the way up to the top trim, the AE86. This all seems really nerdy. Unless you're like a BMW 3 Series enthusiast, a lot of people don't go around calling their cars by their chassis code. You might not know what a JZA80 is, but that's a Supra. But the Hachiroku shared its name with one of the most boring cars of all time. So you can't really go around calling it a Corolla and everyone knows what you're talking about. So Hachiroku, or AE86, became its real name. Now, the 80s in Japan was just a golden era of fun and interesting cars. Why does the 86 rise above the rest? Well, a lot of that has to do with the people that drove them. And you probably know one person that drove them delivering tofu down a mountain. Well, that's based on real Japanese culture. You see, before drifting was all cool and mainstream and an actual sport, back in the 80s it was just a way for outlaw car guys to stay sane at night. You see, Japan is super densely populated. Street racing there is pretty much impossible. You're never even hitting the speed limit, let alone going over it. So instead, for drivers and enthusiasts to enjoy their cars, they headed for the mountains, to get away from the crowds and just enjoy driving. And that's where drifting culture in Japan originated, and where one man rose above the rest to become probably one of the most famous Japanese drivers of the 80s and 90s. And I am talking about Keiichi Tsuchiya, a man who is legendary to car weebs like me, and looks absolutely out of place in any car other than an AE86. The Hachiroku and Tsuchiya are tied at the hip. The man is so prolific, the man is so well known in drifting and Corolla scenes that he even ended up in the movie Tokyo Drift. And the Hachiroku love doesn't just stop with Keiichi. The creator of the Rough World crew, you may know as Nakai-san, actually drove an AE86 before he got into all these crazy wide-body Porsches. Now, what if you want to own one? Well, you're kind of too late. You see, back when Squid was baby Squid, playing with drift cars in the streets of Los Angeles, the Toyota Corolla GT-S was like the cheapest drift car you could possibly buy. You could get them for like 2,000 bucks. But today, they're selling for more than they cost new. Yes, you can find some examples for around 10 grand today, which, let's be honest, if you're like me, that's $10,000 well spent. And actually a wise investment if you get a good example. But you're not getting a lot of car for the money. But if you want something legit, JDM, right-hand drive, a proper AE86 that's even got the Panda paint job, you're talking close to 3 times that price. But even at that price, a car like that is likely to appreciate, because like the Kenmari Skyline, the AE86 is revered in Japan. It's almost like a national monument. That is how big of an impact this car had across the pond. And interestingly enough, to import one might cost you more than an American one for that fact, because the Japanese love this car so much that they're actually worth more in Japan than they are here stateside. So get yourself the American Corolla GT-S and have a hell of a lot of fun driving really slowly. And what really makes the Corolla AE86 special and makes it appreciate over time is it's the last of its kind. It's the last rear-wheel drive, high-revving, fun Corolla. But it's not the last rear-wheel drive, fun Toyota. Yes, from 1987 on, the Toyota Corolla is forgettable. It's terrible. But thankfully, Toyota came to their senses in 2013 and revived the cheap, econo, rear-wheel drive sports car for the masses with the Toyota GT86.
I could come bearing good news. Feels like my gears are back into motion, and I'll share my momentum with you.
Now, really? The GT86 started in 2007 as like a really weird concept car. Then, in 2008, Toyota bought stock in Subaru, and Toyota tried to bring back a little bit of fun and excitement back into their lineup. They hired a designer named Tetsuya Tada, and did something that Toyota hadn't done in a long time. They created a car that emphasized fun above all else. And like the 86 that it was inspired by, it wasn't fast. It wasn't even the best handling car it could be. But that didn't matter. Once people got their hands on the GT86, they knew immediately that it was just a blast to drive. It was like a Mazda Miata but grown up, more powerful, a roof, space, and mature lines that you wouldn't mistake for a Barbie car. It was a lightweight, inexpensive, easy to drive sports car with nearly unlimited potential. And the hype for this car was so real that before it even hit the market, there was pretty much any kind of modification you could want for it. This was a car that Toyota fans had been waiting for decades. Toyota had actually captured the spirit of the original AE86. And just like the original, they're even better used. They're cheap, they're plenty powerful for you, and they're fun. And they're a blank canvas for which you can create your dream car out of. They're even easy to work on. You can't say that about pretty much any car nowadays. And yeah, they're not that fast. They do 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds. But if you compare it to its older sibling, you needed to count your crawl up to highway speeds on a calendar. But that's not the point of the 86. It's not about going fast, it's about having fun. And today, unlike the older 86, they're actually a bargain. Right now, you can get a high mileage example of one of these for about 10,000 bucks. But knowing Toyota reliability, that might not be the end of the world. Otherwise, for under 20 grand, you can be driving a very clean facelifted 86 today. Just make sure you get one with a manual transmission so that you don't look like a fool when you're wearing your Save the Manuals t-shirt. Now the only problem, and I've talked about this before, is that for the money, there are a lot faster cars. I know the 86 isn't about horsepower, but wouldn't it be nice if it just had a little more? I think the biggest complaint anyone can have about the GT86 or the Subaru BRZ is that they get upstaged by pretty much everything for the price. The comparable WRX weighs more, it even has the same engine block, but the FA with a turbo means that the WRX is a full second faster 0 to 60. That turbo gives the WRX 100 more horsepower. Why can't Toyota just give the GT86 a damn turbo? If you ask Toyota, it's because it'll ruin the balance of the car. Never mind all the tuners out there that add turbos to their GT86, and it's still just a fantastic car. My guess is, if the GT86 had that turbo, no one would buy the WRX, and Subaru might not be very happy about that. Now, for powerheads, there is hope. After a long line of somewhat disappointing special editions of the 86, Toyota has finally teased the GR86. If you don't know, GR stands for Gazoo Racing, which is frankly an awesome name. Anything that rhymes with kazoo is good with me.
Oh, hi.
Now, Gazoo Racing has been in the limelight recently because of the GR Yaris, which is a better STI than the WRX STI. Fight me in the comments. And there's now a GR Supra as well. Does this mean with the GR86 that we finally get a turbo-powered 86? No. It's got 30 more horsepower though. That's not nothing. But it just seems like Toyota's holding the 86 back. I think they don't want to make it too fast because it'll start making the Supra look bad. Which, to be fair, the Mark V Supra is already kind of skating on thin ice in that regard. The truth is though that the GR86 with that extra bump in power is probably going to be one of the best driving cars on the road for the price. And let's be honest, the GR86 is expected to cost about as much as a Miata, which you tell me which one you think you're getting more car with the money. And again, the Hachiroku is not about going fast. It's not about having more power than you need. Growing up, drivers of 86s at the track were like legends to me. They were the David and everything else was Goliath. Their engines literally bouncing off the red line the entire time just to keep up. And they'd still win. They'd still smoke you. They'd still drift better than you. Like the Miata, it's a perfect car to push to the limits because most other cars you never even get close to the limits of. So in that regard, the GT86 of today and the GR86 that's coming definitely lives up to the Hachiroku tradition of being just enough car for just the right driver. And that's why the AE86 and the entire 86 lineup are so important to us enthusiasts. That's it for the video. Let me know down below what your favorite 86 is, and like the video if you liked it. And subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this type of content, because we're gonna keep bringing you stuff like this pretty much every other day. I've been the Squid, this is Ideal Cars, and keep living the ideal lifestyle.